That night I thought my story was over. Standing in the rain, I was nothing but a forgotten wife, abandoned like yesterday's news. But when that blind woman took my hand and told me to trust her, something inside me shifted. I didn't know it yet, but in that moment I stopped surviving and started living again. Before I start the story, I want to get to know you too. Write the flag colors of the country you're watching from, and I'll try to guess. Who knows, maybe we're neighbors. The streetlights cast their amber glow across the wet pavement as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Our row had started over something so trivial. I'd forgotten to pick up the bottle of wine Marcus wanted for dinner with his work colleagues. A simple mistake, but to him it was like I'd committed an unforgivable sin. "Can't you do anything right, Denise?" He'd bellowed in the car, pounding the steering wheel. 30 years together, and you're still disappointing me. His words cut deeper than the freezing rain now soaking through my coat. 30 years of marriage reduced to a forgotten bottle of wine. 30 years where I'd gradually become a shadow, a faded version of myself. The tears started falling, mixing with the raindrops. Then came the final straw. "For God's sake, are you going to start your waterworks now? I couldn't take any more of your drama." That's when he pulled over sharply at that deserted bus stop, looked at me with pure contempt, and ordered me out. When I hesitated, he leaned across and opened the passenger door himself. "Get out, Denise. If you're going to cry, then stay out here in the street." I stumbled out, bewildered and disbelieving. He roared off in the car, leaving me standing in the torrential rain in a part of South London I barely knew. The water ran down my face, dripped from my nose. I looked at my wrinkled hands, trembling with cold and fear. 57 years old. No job for 2 decades because Marcus said I should focus on the house. No close friends because he reckoned married women didn't need mates who just fill their heads with nonsense. No family nearby because one by one he'd severed those connections, claiming my relatives were difficult people. And now, alone in the rain, I wondered at what point I'd allowed my life to become this. That's when I heard the gentle tap, tap, tap of a walking cane on wet pavement. At first I thought it was just the sound of the rain, but soon I saw the silhouette of an elderly lady approaching. She wore a beige overcoat and had silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. Her eyes, though unable to see, seemed to hold remarkable intensity. "Not the most inviting evening to be standing about, is it?" she said, stopping near me. Her voice was calm, almost musical, contrasting sharply with the violence of the storm. "I'm fine," I replied automatically. That response that becomes second nature when you've spent years hiding the truth. She smiled, a knowing smile that seemed to see more than her words revealed. "Your voice says otherwise, dear." That's the voice of someone who's just been abandoned. That word, abandoned, broke something inside me. I couldn't hold back the sob that had been trapped in my throat. "How do you know?" I asked through my tears. "When you lose your sight, your other senses sharpen. I can hear the hurt in your breathing, feel the tremor in your body, sense that your clothes are soaked through. Most importantly," she paused, tilting her head slightly, "I can feel when someone's been destroyed from the inside." Just then, a sleek black car pulled up beside us. A man in a suit quickly got out with an umbrella. "Mrs. Hughes, you shouldn't have gone out alone in this weather," he said with concern. "David, perfect timing," she replied with surprising calm. Then, turning toward me, she whispered, "Pretend you're my granddaughter. Your husband's going to regret this." Before I could process what was happening, she took my hand with surprising firmness for someone her age. "David, this is my granddaughter. She was visiting me and got caught in the rain. Let's get her home." The driver looked at me confused, but didn't question it. Mrs. Hughes squeezed my hand as if to say, "Trust me." And I, with no other choice, followed her to the car. That's when I noticed Marcus's car slowly returning down the street. Perhaps in a rare moment of conscience, he'd realized the cruelty of his actions. Or maybe he just remembered I had the house keys. Either way, there he was, watching as I got into that luxurious vehicle with the elegant blind lady, Our eyes met for an instant. For the first time in years, I saw something different in his expression. Surprise, perhaps even a flicker of regret. Mrs. Hughes, as if she could sense his presence, turned toward him and said loudly, "Let's go home, darling." Nobody deserves to wait in the rain for someone who doesn't know how to appreciate them. The car pulled away smoothly. Through the rear window, I saw Marcus standing in the rain, his face transformed by confusion. I was getting into a car with a stranger, but strangely, for the first time in ages, I didn't feel threatened, just curious. "Where are we going?" I asked quietly. "To a place where you can dry off, warm up, and most importantly," she paused, her sightless eyes seeming to focus on some distant point. "A place where you can remember who you were before you became what that man wanted you to be." I breathed deeply, catching the gentle scent of lavender that emanated from her. The car's interior was elegant and comforting, so different from the coldness I'd grown accustomed to. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, still not understanding what was happening. She smiled again, but this time there was sadness in her expression, as if touching a painful memory. "Because someone did the same for me many years ago, and because I recognized something in you that I once was too." The car moved through the city, streetlights reflecting in the puddles. I watched this woman who, despite her blindness, seemed to see more than everyone with perfect vision. Something about her radiated strength and dignity, two qualities I'd lost long ago. "You don't even know my name," I murmured. "Denise," she replied simply. "I heard the driver call you that. And you're Eleanor?" "Yes, Eleanor Hughes. And from what I gathered, you've just been thrown out of the car by your husband, haven't you?" I nodded, then realized she couldn't see my gesture. "Yes," I replied, feeling both shame and relief at voicing that truth. "Well then, I think we have much to discuss," she said. "But first, let's get you sorted." The car turned through iron gates and proceeded down a tree-lined drive. As we advanced, an imposing townhouse came into view. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of another world. A world I'd forgotten existed. A world where women like Eleanor seemed to command their own destiny. "Welcome to my home, Denise," Eleanor said as David opened the car door. "Or should I say, welcome to your new beginning." Looking at that Victorian townhouse in the rain, I felt something strange stirring within me. It wasn't hope yet, not quite. It was something more primitive, more essential, the feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, I wasn't completely lost. Eleanor's townhouse was like stepping into another era. Wooden floors that creaked softly, antique furniture meticulously preserved, landscape paintings in gold frames, and a silence that seemed to tell stories. David led us to a spacious sitting room where a lit fireplace created a welcoming atmosphere, contrasting with the storm intensifying outside. "David, prepare some tea for us and bring dry clothes for Denise," Eleanor instructed, with a gentleness that didn't diminish her authority. She walked through the room with surprising familiarity for someone who couldn't see, settling into a leather armchair near the fireplace. With a delicate gesture, she indicated I should sit across from her. "How long have you lived like this, Denise?" she asked without preamble. "Like what?" I replied, knowing exactly what she meant but trying to buy time. Afraid, ashamed, diminished. Her direct words hit me like a slap. Nobody had ever named my condition so precisely. "I'm not sure," I confessed. "It wasn't all at once. It was gradual, like water seeping into a wall. You don't notice until the structure starts to give way." Eleanor nodded as if she understood the metaphor perfectly. "Marcus wasn't always like this," I continued, feeling the need to explain, to justify. "At first he was attentive, protective, said he wanted to look after me, that I deserved to rest, didn't need to worry about work or responsibilities." "And when did that change?" I thought for several moments. I don't know if it changed or just revealed itself. The criticism started subtle. "That dress doesn't suit you. You should lose a few pounds. The way you speak embarrasses me." Then came comparisons with other women, prolonged silences when I said something that displeased him. Control over my friendships, my schedule, my money. I paused, surprised by my own eloquence. How long had it been since I'd spoken like this, without fear of being interrupted or ridiculed? "And today he left you in the rain," Eleanor completed, her voice carrying not pity but deep understanding. "Over a bottle of wine," I added. And the sentence sounded so absurd that a bitter laugh escaped my lips. David returned with a tray, served tea in porcelain cups, and placed a stack of folded clothes beside me. "These belong to my daughter," Eleanor explained. "She doesn't live here anymore but keeps some things in her old room. Should fit you." I thanked him and took the cup David offered. The aroma of cinnamon and apple was comforting. I sipped, feeling warmth spread through my trembling body. "How did you know?" I finally asked. "How did you know who I was? What had happened?" Eleanor smiled, her sightless eyes fixed on a point beyond me. "I told you, when you lose one sense, others sharpen. But there's more. Life taught me to recognize the signs, the tremor in your voice, the fear of touch, the habit of apologizing for existing. These are marks we carry, visible to those who've been in the same place." She reached out and touched my face gently. Her fingers traced my features as if reading a map. "Beautiful," she murmured, "and strong, though you don't know it yet." I pulled back slightly, uncomfortable with the compliment. How long had it been since anyone said something like that to me? "I don't feel strong," I confessed. "I feel broken." "Broken, yes," she agreed, "but not destroyed. There's a crucial difference. What's broken can be mended. Sometimes we become stronger precisely at the fractures." David entered the room again. "Mrs. Hughes, the guest room is ready." "Thank you, David." "Denise, you must be exhausted. Why don't you have a hot bath and rest? Tomorrow we'll continue our conversation." I was suddenly conscious of the exhaustion weighing on me. I followed David up a wooden staircase to the second floor. He led me to a spacious room with a 4-poster bed covered in pristine white linens. "The bathroom's through there," he indicated. "Fresh towels and everything you need. If you require anything, just pull that cord." I thanked him, and as soon as he left, I collapsed onto the bed. The reality of what had happened hit me like a wave. I was in a stranger's house. Marcus would probably be furious, and I was relieved. That realization frightened me more than anything. After a hot bath, I put on the nightgown Eleanor had lent me. It was soft and smelled of lavender, like her. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window. The rain continued, but now it seemed gentle, almost musical. That's when I noticed something odd about the room. On the dresser were several picture frames, all turned face down. Moved by curiosity, I approached and turned one over. The photograph showed a young woman, perhaps in her 30s, with a luminous smile. Beside her stood an elegant man with a serious expression. They seemed to be at a party. I looked more closely and realized the woman was Eleanor, decades younger, with bright, living eyes. This was her before she lost her sight. I examined another photo. Eleanor again, now holding a baby. Her smile was different, more contained, and there was something in her eyes. Fear. I turned over another photograph. Eleanor with a girl of about 10, probably her daughter. The man no longer appeared in the photos. As I was replacing the frames in their original positions, I heard a sound in the corridor. Quickly I returned to bed. The door opened softly and Eleanor appeared, her silhouette outlined against the corridor light. "I see you're still awake," she said. "How did you know? Your breathing changes when you're lying down, and you're not lying down, are you?" I smiled, impressed. "No, I'm sitting on the bed." She entered the room, her cane guiding her path with precision. "You know, Denise, this house holds many stories. Some beautiful, others painful, like all old houses, I suppose." She sat beside me, the mattress dipping slightly under her weight. "I saw the photographs," I confessed, feeling I should be honest. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have looked. Don't worry. Actually, I left them there on purpose. I wanted you to see them." "Why?" She took a deep breath before answering. "Because that woman in the photos was once like you. Dependent, controlled, diminished bit by bit, until she believed she was nothing without that man beside her." I looked at her with new eyes, trying to imagine how this strong, confident woman could have ever been a version of me. "What happened?" I asked. "He blinded me," she replied simply. The phrase fell like a stone in the room's silence. I felt my blood freeze. How do you mean? Not literally with his own hands, she explained. But it was because of him. We were arguing as always. He pushed me. I hit my head. The trauma affected the optic nerve. The doctor said the blindness would be temporary, but I never recovered my sight. I swallowed hard, horrified. And what did you do? Eleanor smiled, a smile that contained all the strength in the world. I discovered I didn't need my eyes to see the truth. And the truth was that I was much more than the woman he'd tried to create. The day I lost my sight, I found my voice. She stood, leaning on her cane with elegance. Now rest, Denise. You'll have time to discover your own voice. And who knows, in the process, you might help me understand something I've been seeking for a long time. What's that? I asked. The meaning of freedom, she replied, heading toward the door. Good night, Denise. May your dreams be gentler than your reality. After she left, I lay down and pulled the covers up to my chin. Outside, the rain continued, but it no longer seemed threatening to me. It was just water, after all. And water, as Eleanor had suggested, could both destroy and nourish, depending on how we received it. I closed my eyes, thinking about the photographs turned face down and how sometimes we need to lose something to truly begin to see. I woke to the sound of birdsong. For a moment, I was disoriented, not recognizing the room where I was. Then memories of the previous night flooded my mind. The row with Marcus, the rain, Eleanor rescuing me. I sat up in bed, watching the gentle morning light filter through the lace curtains. Eleanor's garden stretched before me, lush and well-tended, with rose bushes, a central fountain, and ancient trees. It was a secret refuge in the midst of the city. I dressed in the clothes Eleanor had lent me, a long cotton skirt and a simple blouse but made of fine fabric. I paused before the mirror and barely recognized myself, not just because of the different clothes, but because of something in my expression, as if one night away from Marcus had already begun to undo years of conditioning. I went downstairs, guided by the aroma of coffee and fresh bread. I found Eleanor in the dining room, seated at the table with elegance, as if she could see every detail before her. Good morning. Denise, she greeted me before I'd even announced my presence. How do you always know it's me? I asked, approaching. Your perfume, your way of walking. Each person has a unique signature, you know. Sit down and have coffee with me. I obeyed, observing the impeccably set table. Fine china, silver cutlery, linen napkins. David appeared with a tray and served coffee in my cup. Did you sleep well? Eleanor asked. Yes, thank you. Better than I have in a long time. I imagine so. Sometimes a safe space is all we need to finally rest. We had coffee in silence for a few minutes. There was something comforting about that shared quiet, so different from the tense silences I was used to. You must be wondering why I brought you here, Eleanor said finally. I confess I am. Eleanor set her cup down delicately. Many years ago, when I lost my sight, someone appeared in my life. A woman who, just as I did with you yesterday, rescued me when I was about to give up. She taught me that our greatest strength lies precisely in our vulnerabilities. I promised myself that if I ever found someone in the same situation, I'd do the same. She paused, running her fingers along the table's edge, as if checking its cleanliness. But there's more, she continued. Last night, as I was preparing for bed, I had a feeling. Something tells me you're not here by chance, Denise. Nothing happens by accident. There was an intensity in her voice that made me uneasy. What do you mean? I mean that perhaps you have as much to teach me as I do you. Before I could question further, Eleanor stood up. Let's take a walk in the garden. The day's too lovely to stay indoors. We went out to the garden. The air was fresh after the previous night's rain, carrying the scent of flowers. Eleanor walked with confidence, her cane merely complementing an internal knowledge of the space. I noticed she knew exactly where each bush, each path, and each obstacle was located. How do you manage to move around so well? I asked. Practice and memory. I know every centimeter of this garden. It was the first thing I learned to do alone after I lost my sight. Walk through my own garden without anyone's help. We reached a stone bench near the fountain. The sound of water created a relaxing melody. "Sit," she invited. We sat side by side, the warm morning sun heating our faces. "Denise, what did you do before Marcus? Who were you?" The question caught me by surprise. It had been so long since I'd thought of myself as a person separate from him. "I was a literature teacher," I replied, the memory emerging with difficulty, as if I had to dig deep to find it. "I taught secondary school. And did you enjoy it?" "I loved it. I adored seeing teenagers' eyes light up when they discovered a poem that touched them, or when they finally understood the depth of a classic novel." I smiled at the memory, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't experienced in ages. "Why did you stop?" My smile disappeared. "Marcus thought it wasn't worth the effort for the little I earned. He said he could support us alone, that I deserved to rest. At first it seemed like a gesture of love. Later I realized it was control. Without my own money, without my independence, I was trapped. But by that point, I'd already lost contact with colleagues, confidence in myself. I was tired of crying." Eleanor touched my hand lightly. "Nothing that's truly ours can be completely lost," she said. "It's just sleeping, waiting for you to awaken it again." We sat in silence for a few moments, just listening to the bird song and the fountain's murmur. "Eleanor, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course. What happened to your husband after the accident?" Her face hardened slightly. Richard continued his life. For a while, he tried to pretend nothing had changed, that he was still the devoted husband caring for his disabled wife. It was a role that suited him in society's eyes. She paused, her expression intense. But I had changed. Blindness gave me a vision I'd never had before. I started challenging him, refusing his control, demanding my space. That infuriated him. The verbal abuse intensified, the control became more severe, until one day I made a decision. Which was? I asked for a divorce. The simplicity of the sentence didn't diminish its power. For a woman of Eleanor's generation in a conservative society, divorce wasn't just a separation, it was a personal revolution. How did you manage it? With a lot of fear, she admitted, but also with a lot of determination. I discovered I'd inherited properties from my father that Richard didn't know about. I opened a secret account, planned every detail, and then one day, while he was on a business trip, I changed the locks on the house. A slight smile appeared on her lips as she recalled. When he returned and realized he couldn't get in, he was furious. He threatened, shouted, tried to break down the door. I called the police. It was quite the scandal. Of course. High society loved the drama. The poor blind wife throwing her husband out of the house. "And weren't you afraid of being alone, being blind?" "I was terrified," she confessed. But I discovered something important. The fear of loneliness was smaller than the fear of continuing to live that shadow life. And with time, I learned that being alone doesn't mean being lonely. She turned toward me, her milky eyes seeming to focus on something beyond me. "True blindness, Denise, isn't the absence of sight. It's the inability to see your own worth." Her words struck me deeply. For how long had I been blind in that way? And now, I asked, what do I do? Only you can answer that, but I can help you find the path. It starts with a simple question. Who is Denise without Marcus? I swallowed hard. I didn't know the answer. I'd been Marcus's wife for so long that I'd forgotten how to be just Denise. "I don't know," I admitted. "Then that's the first step, rediscovering yourself." "And I'm going to propose an exercise to begin." She stood up, extending her hand to me. "Let's go to the library. I want you to read me a poem, an excerpt from a novel, anything that touched your heart when you still remembered who you were." We went to the house, and she led me to an imposing library. Shelves from floor to ceiling, filled with books, some so old their spines were worn by time. "Choose one," she instructed. I ran my fingers along the spines, feeling the leather, paper, fabric. Finally, I pulled out a volume of Maya Angelou. I opened to a random page and began to read. "And still I rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, Like dust, I rise. My voice, initially tremulous, gained strength as the words flowed. It was like awakening from a long sleep. Continue, Eleanor encouraged. I read another poem, and another. My voice became firmer, more mine with each verse. When I finally stopped, there were tears in my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of recognition. There was a piece of the Denise I'd lost. See? Eleanor said softly. She's still there. The teacher, the literature lover, the woman who existed before being just a man's shadow. At that moment, my mobile phone, which Eleanor had asked David to retrieve from my handbag, rang. It was Marcus. My heart raced as if I'd been caught in a transgression. This conditioned reflex revealed how deep my imprisonment was. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, Eleanor said gently. I don't know what to say to him, I confessed. Then say nothing. Not now. First, find your own voice. Then, if you want, use it to speak with him. I let the phone ring until it went silent. A strange sensation invaded me, guilt mixed with a hint of freedom. Eleanor seemed to sense my confusion. The feeling of guilt, she explained as if reading my thoughts, is the last chain that binds us. It's their voice inside us, telling us we have no right to our own lives. I spent the rest of the day with Eleanor, listening to her stories, getting to know the corners of the mansion she navigated with such familiarity. At night after dinner, she took me to a special room, her music room. A grand piano occupied the center of the space, gleaming under the soft light of table lamps. I play a bit every evening, she said, sitting at the bench. Music helps me organize my thoughts. Her fingers glided across the keys with impressive precision, creating a melancholy yet beautiful melody. I closed my eyes, letting the music envelop me. Do you know what I learned, Denise? She said without stopping playing. Every note needs silence between them to make sense. The same happens with life. Sometimes we need silence to hear our own melody. I fell asleep. That night, lulled by thoughts about silences, the oppressive ones I'd lived with Marcus and the nourishing ones I was now experiencing with Eleanor. The next morning, Eleanor proposed a disconcerting exercise. I want you to walk blindfolded, she said during coffee. Why? To learn to trust your other senses. To understand that seeing isn't just a matter of eyes. Reluctantly, I allowed her to tie a silk scarf around my eyes. The sudden darkness left me disoriented. Now take my arm, she instructed. We're going for a walk in the garden. It was a transforming experience. Deprived of sight, I realized how much I depended on it to interpret the world. Sounds intensified, the rustling of leaves, the buzzing of bees, the distant chiming of a bell. Smells gained new dimensions, the scent of roses, damp earth, the aroma of bread from the kitchen. My feet felt the different textures of the path, stone, grass, wood. How is this possible? I asked, marveled by the richness of sensations. The world is much more than what we see, Eleanor replied. When we depend only on our eyes, we lose half the experience. After an hour of exploration, she removed the blindfold. Colors seemed more vivid, contours sharper. I looked at Eleanor with renewed admiration. Thank you, I murmured. Don't thank me yet, she said with an enigmatic smile. Your journey has only begun. In the days that followed, Marcus kept calling, increasingly furious. Eventually, with Eleanor's encouragement, I answered. Where the hell are you? He shouted without preamble. In a safe place, I replied, surprised by the firmness in my voice. Come home now. This is ridiculous, Denise. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Yes, I replied simply. I'm breathing for the first time in years. There was stunned silence on the other end. Have you been drinking? Are you on drugs? Who's there with you? Nobody's manipulating me, Marcus. For the first time, I'm thinking for myself. It's that old blind woman, isn't it? I saw you getting in her car. What does she want from you? Money? I felt a wave of anger rise in my chest. She doesn't want anything except to help me see what I became because of you. Because of me? He laughed bitterly. I gave you everything. A home, comfort, protection. And this is how you thank me? You didn't give me anything, I replied, the words coming as if they had a life of their own. You just traded my freedom for a gilded cage, and I, like a fool, thought that was love. You've lost your mind, he said, his voice now low and threatening. If you don't come home today, I'll call the police. I'll tell them that woman is keeping you against your will. Do that, I challenged. It'll be interesting explaining to the authorities why you abandoned me in the rain. He went silent, and I realized I'd touched a sensitive spot. Marcus always worried about his public image, what others would think of him. Denise, his voice was now pleading, another tactic I knew well. I'm sorry about what happened. I lost my head. I was stressed with work. You know how it is. Let's forget this. Come home. I'm worried about you. For a moment, I felt the old guilt emerging, the old impulse to appease, to prioritize his feelings over mine. But then I remembered Eleanor's words. Guilt is the last chain. No, Marcus, I said with a calm I didn't know I possessed. I won't come back, not now. I need time. Time for what? Time to remember who I am. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but not with fear, with adrenaline, with power. Eleanor was sitting in the garden when I returned. Her face turned toward the sun as if she could absorb its light. How did it go? She asked. Liberating, I replied, still surprised by my own courage. She smiled, satisfied. Tonight, she said, I want to show you something special. I spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous excitement, anticipating what Eleanor might want to show me. After dinner, she led me to the third floor of the townhouse, to an area I hadn't yet explored. This was my father's studio, she explained as she opened a heavy wooden door. He was a painter. The space was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows that now reflected the darkness of night. Several easels were scattered throughout the room, covered by cloths. The walls displayed paintings in various styles, landscapes, portraits, still lifes. How do you know what's in the canvases? I asked. I mean, since you lost your sight, she completed. I memorized them before. And for new ones, I asked David or visitors to describe them to me. Art, like life, doesn't need to be seen to be felt. She walked to one of the easels and removed the cloth covering it. It was a portrait of her when she was younger, with an intense and defiant gaze. My father painted this shortly before he died, she explained. He said he'd captured something in me that I hadn't yet discovered. At the time, I didn't understand. Now I know he saw the woman I would become, not the girl I was. She passed her fingers over the canvas as if she could read the image through touch. Denise, have you ever wondered why some people enter our lives exactly when we need them? Coincidence? I suggested. She smiled, shaking her head. I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in patterns, cycles, invisible connections. She turned to another easel and removed the cloth. The painting revealed took my breath away. It was a portrait of a woman who looked surprisingly like me, but dressed in clothes from another era. Who is she? I asked, approaching to examine it better. My grandmother Mary, painted in 1932. I looked from the painting to Eleanor, confused. The resemblance is striking, isn't it? That's what I thought when David described you to me. That's why I was certain it wasn't coincidence you were at that bus stop that specific night. A shiver ran down my spine. What are you saying? Eleanor approached, touching my face gently. I'm saying some souls meet more than once, Denise. That some cycles need to be broken by different generations until the lesson is learned. I looked again at the portrait. The woman's eyes seemed to stare at me through time, transmitting a message I couldn't completely decipher. My grandmother, Eleanor continued, lived in an era when women were their husband's property. She suffered in silence, like so many others, but unlike most, she left a legacy. Eleanor walked to a small chest of drawers and opened a drawer. From there, she took out an old book, bound in leather. Her journal, she explained, written in code so her husband couldn't read it. She entrusted it to my mother, who passed it to me. Now I want you to read it. I took the book reverently. Why me? Eleanor smiled, her milky eyes fixed on a point beyond me. Because some stories need to be known so they don't repeat. And because you, Denise, like me, like my grandmother, are at a crossroads. The path you choose won't just affect your life, but that of many other women who'll come after you. I left the studio with the journal in my hands, feeling its weight, not just physical, but symbolic. That night, by lamplight, I began reading the words of a woman who'd lived almost a century before me, but whose pains and hopes echoed mine with frightening precision. The next morning, when I came down for coffee, I found Eleanor already at the table, as always, but there was something different in her expression, a subtle tension that didn't match her usual serenity. "Did something happen?" I asked. "Marcus was here," she replied directly. I felt my body freeze. "When? How did he find this place?" "Early this morning. As for how, I imagine he followed your phone or investigated who I was." "What did he want?" "What do you think?" "He wanted you back. Said I was poisoning you against him, that this was kidnapping, that he'd call the police." I felt a wave of panic. "And what did you say?" Eleanor smiled, a smile that contained a strength I was only beginning to understand. "I told him you're an adult woman who made a decision, that my house is open to you for as long as you need, and that if he tried to force you into anything, he'd have to face not just legal consequences, but also my considerable social influence. He left. Yes, but I don't think he's given up. Men like Marcus don't give up easily on what they consider their property." I lowered my head, feeling the familiar weight of guilt. "I'm sorry for bringing him here, for involving you in this." Eleanor extended her hand across the table, finding mine with impressive precision. "Never apologize for seeking your freedom, Denise. Never." I squeezed her hand, feeling a gratitude that words couldn't express. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Continue what you started." "Did you read my grandmother's journal?" I began. "It's disturbing how her words could be mine." Eleanor nodded. "Oppression has many faces but the same essence. What we need is—" She was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. David entered the dining room, his expression worried. "Mrs. Hughes, it's him again. And this time he's brought a police officer." Time seemed to freeze. The officer was a middle-aged man with a tired expression, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Marcus stood beside him, displaying that expression of sincere concern he reserved for public occasions. The mask that had fooled me so many times. "Denise, thank God!" he exclaimed upon seeing me, opening his arms as if expecting an embrace. I was so worried. I didn't move. The officer looked from me to Marcus, then to Eleanor, who remained serene in her chair. "Ma'am," he addressed me, "your husband is concerned. Says you disappeared days ago without explanation." Before I could respond, Marcus intervened. "She's not well, officer. She's been having episodes. She was very emotional when she left home. This lady," he pointed to Eleanor, "took advantage of the situation." I felt a wave of indignation rise in my chest. It was always like this. Marcus rewriting the narrative, turning me into the unstable woman, the mad one, the fragile one who needed protection. "That's not true," I said, with a firmness that seemed to surprise everyone, including myself. "He threw me out of the car during a storm, leaving me alone without money or my mobile, because I'd forgotten to buy a bottle of wine." The officer frowned, looking at Marcus. "Is this true, sir?" Marcus laughed nervously. "Of course not. We had an argument, yes, but she got out of the car on her own. She was hysterical. You know how women can be. When I went back to get her, she'd already disappeared." "Officer," Eleanor intervened, her voice calm and controlled, "I can assure you Mrs. Walker is here of her own free will. She's my guest and can stay as long as she wishes." "She's manipulating my wife," Marcus insisted, his composure beginning to crack, filling her head with absurd ideas. The officer looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Ma'am," he addressed me again, "are you being held here against your will?" "No," I replied firmly. "I'm here because I chose to be. I'm an adult woman, not a hostage. See?" exclaimed Marcus, his facade beginning to crumble. She'd never speak like that normally. "She's being influenced." Something inside me broke. So many years being silenced, so many years being described by him to others, so many years without my own voice. The only person who influenced me for decades was you. Marcus, I said, each word loaded with long-suppressed truth. Convincing me I was incompetent, that I needed your protection, that I was nothing without you. Marcus paled. The officer looked from one to the other, clearly perceiving there was more to this story than a simple marital disagreement. Ma'am, do you have any formal accusations against your husband? He asked. I hesitated. Emotional abuse, coercive control, isolation, gaslighting. I'd learned these terms only in recent days, reading books in Eleanor's library. Terms to name what I'd lived for 30 years. Not at this moment, I replied. I just want space, time to think. The officer nodded. Sir, he addressed Marcus, it appears your wife is here by choice. There's no crime being committed. This is ridiculous. Marcus exploded, his facade of concerned husband completely crumbling. She's my wife. I have rights. She's not your property, the officer responded firmly. Unless there's evidence of crime or danger, I can't force her to go with you. Marcus looked at me, his eyes now cold as ice. You'll regret this, Denise, he said low, almost a whisper. Without me, you're nothing. Eleanor, who until then had observed the scene in silence, stood up leaning on her cane. I think it's time for you to leave, sir. My house, my property, my rules. There was such authority in her voice that even Marcus hesitated. This isn't over, he said before turning and leaving, slamming the door forcefully. The officer remained for a moment. Ma'am, he said gently, if you need help, don't hesitate to call the station. After he left, I collapsed in the chair, trembling. Eleanor approached, resting her hand on my shoulder. You were brave, she said. I don't feel brave, I confessed. I feel terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Denise. It's acting despite it. That afternoon, while I was in the library trying to distract myself with a book, David entered with a concerned expression. Mrs. Walker, there's a man at the door asking for you. Says he's your brother. My heart accelerated. Raymond, I hadn't heard from him in years. Another relationship Marcus had managed to destroy, convincing me my brother only approached out of financial interest. You can let him in, I replied nervously. Raymond entered hesitant, looking older than his 54 years. His eyes, so similar to mine, were full of concern. Denise, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It's been so long. I stood up, unsure how to react. Part of me wanted to hug him. Another was cautious. Marcus had planted so many seeds of distrust in my mind. How did you find me? I asked. Marcus called me. Said you were in danger, that you'd been manipulated by a rich, eccentric woman. Of course. Marcus, unable to get what he wanted through force, was now trying another approach, my brother as emissary. And you believed him? Raymond shrugged. Not entirely. That's why I came to see for myself. We remained silent for a moment, years of estrangement creating a chasm between us. I'm fine, Raymond, I said finally. Better than I've been in years, actually. Marcus says you left him. It wasn't quite like that. He threw me out of the car during a storm. Eleanor found me and offered shelter. Raymond frowned. Eleanor? The owner of this house? Yes, she's been a light at the end of a very dark tunnel. He approached, examining my face. You look different, Denise. More like yourself, I smiled, surprised by his perception. That's how I feel. Like I'm waking up from a long dream or nightmare. Marcus said she brainwashed you, that she's manipulating you for some sinister purpose. I laughed. The idea was so absurd. The only person who manipulated my mind for decades was your friend Marcus. Raymond looked uncomfortable. He was never my friend, Denise. It was he who drove us apart, you know. He invented stories, said I'd spoken badly of you, that I was trying to extort you. And why didn't you tell me? I tried several times, but you always believed him, always. I felt a wave of shame. It was true. Marcus had become my filter of reality, the lens through which I interpreted the world. I'm sorry, I murmured. Raymond smiled sadly. It's not your fault. He's persuasive. It's more than that, I replied. He's calculating, systematic. He knew exactly how to isolate me, how to make me depend on him for everything, even my own identity. My brother took a step forward, hesitant, then hugged me. The physical contact, the familiar warmth, broke something inside me. I cried in his arms as I hadn't cried in years. "I'm here now," he said softly, "and it seems you found help." When we separated, Eleanor was at the door, David beside her. "Forgive the intrusion," she said. I heard voices and was concerned. "Eleanor, this is my brother Raymond," I introduced. Eleanor smiled, extending her hand, which Raymond shook respectfully. "It's a pleasure to meet Denise's family," she said. "David, could you bring tea for our guest?" We spent the afternoon talking, Raymond filling in the gaps of years of estrangement. I learned he'd remarried after a difficult divorce, had a teenage daughter, worked as an architect. Small details of a life I'd completely lost, convinced by Marcus that my brother didn't care about me. When Raymond said goodbye, promising to return, I felt a mixture of joy and grief. Joy for recovering a lost connection. Grief for the wasted years. "Family is a precious gift," Eleanor commented when we were alone. "Something men like Marcus work hard to take from us." "Why?" I asked. "Why do they do this?" Eleanor sighed, her face assuming a contemplative expression. "Power," she replied simply. "Control. The more isolated you are, the more power he has over you. The fewer people who validate your reality, the easier it is for him to distort it." I spent that night reflecting on Eleanor's words and rereading Mary's journal. Her words, written in 1935, resonated deeply. "The worst prison isn't made of bars, but of doubts. When he makes me question my own sanity, my perceptions, my feelings, he builds walls stronger than any jail." The next morning, I woke with a decision I'd been postponing, visiting my old house to collect some personal belongings. Eleanor insisted David accompany me. "Don't go alone," she warned. "Men like Marcus are most dangerous when they feel they're losing control." The house I'd shared with Marcus for 3 decades seemed smaller, more oppressive than in my memories. David waited in the car while I used my key to enter. The silence greeted me. Marcus was at work, as I'd hoped. I walked through the rooms with the strange sensation of visiting a museum of a life that was no longer mine. Details I'd never noticed leaped out at me, how few objects reflected my tastes, my preferences. It was Marcus's house, decorated for Marcus, a space where I existed only as an accessory. I went to the bedroom and gathered some clothes, documents, old photographs. As I passed Marcus's bedside table, I noticed an envelope partially hidden under a book. It wasn't my habit to snoop, but something compelled me to look. They were bank statements. I opened them, surprised by what I saw. Accounts I was completely unaware of, large sums being transferred to names I didn't recognize. Among the papers, I found a purchase contract for a flat in his name, an investment he'd never mentioned. While examining the documents, I heard the front door open. I froze, footsteps in the corridor getting closer. The bedroom door opened, and there was Marcus, staring at me with an expression mixing surprise and anger. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice controlled but tense. "I came to collect some of my things," I replied, trying to stay calm despite my racing heart. His eyes went to the papers in my hand. His expression darkened. "You're spying on me now?" "No," I replied. "I just found these by accident." "Who is Maria Santos? Why do you transfer money to her every month?" The silence that followed was more revealing than any answer. "That's none of your business," he said finally. "It is my business when you hide assets that belong to our marriage," I retorted. Surprised by my own assertiveness, "When you say we don't have money for me to return to study, but you buy a secret flat." Marcus stepped forward, snatching the papers from my hand. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know more than you think," I replied, taking a step back. "Eleanor helped me consult a solicitor." "I'm aware of my rights, Marcus." His face contorted into a mask of rage. "That old busybody is ruining everything," he exclaimed. "What does she want from you, Denise? Why does she care?" "She cares because she knows what it's like to be in my position. Because she recognizes the signs. Because unlike you, she sees my value as a human being, not as property." He laughed, a cold, calculated sound. And you believe that? That a stranger, rich and blind, is helping you out of pure kindness? Don't be naive, Denise. Everyone has a motive. Yes, I replied. Her motive is to break a cycle. The same cycle you tried to perpetuate with me. Marcus took another step toward me. Instinctively, I stepped back. You won't survive without me, he said, his voice now dangerously soft. Who's going to look after you? Who's going to pay your bills? That old woman won't be around forever. I'll look after myself, I replied. I always could. You just made me believe I couldn't. At that moment, I heard footsteps in the corridor. David appeared in the doorway, his presence a reminder that I wasn't alone. Everything all right, Mrs. Walker? He asked, looking suspiciously at Marcus. Yes, David, I'm just finishing up. Marcus looked from me to David, realizing he'd lost the moment. This isn't over, he said quietly, just for me. You'll come crawling back when you realize you can't live without me. I picked up my suitcase and left the room. Head held high despite the tremor in my legs. In the car, I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. Did he do anything? David asked, concerned. No, I replied. Not physically, at least. We returned to Eleanor's townhouse. I found her in the garden, sitting near the fountain, her face turned toward the sun. How did it go? She asked as I approached. I told her about the documents, about the confrontation with Marcus. She listened attentively, nodding occasionally. It's not uncommon, she said when I finished. Men like that often hide financial assets. It's part of the control. What do I do now? You've already started doing it, Denise. You're educating yourself, seeking your rights, recovering your autonomy. She paused thoughtfully. You know, I've always believed the liberation process has 3 stages. First, recognizing the chains. Second, finding the key. Third, having the courage to use the key and take the first step out of prison. I looked at my hands, now marked by time, but somehow stronger than they'd ever been. Which stage am I at? I asked. She smiled, that serene smile that had become my beacon in dark days. You're between the 2nd and 3rd stage, Denise. You've already recognized the chains, found the key, and are taking your first hesitant steps toward freedom. The hardest part is over. Now it's about moving forward. That night, I faced a nightmare where I was back in Marcus's house, trying to scream but unable to make any sound. I woke gasping, heart beating irregularly. The full moon illuminated the room through the curtains. I got up, unable to return to sleep, and went down to the kitchen. To my surprise, I found Eleanor sitting at the table, a steaming cup of tea before her. Can't sleep either? She asked, sensing my presence. How did you know it was me? Your perfume and the way you breathe when you're disturbed. I sat across from her, once again amazed by her perception. Nightmare? She asked. Yes, I was back with Marcus, wanting to scream but voiceless. Nightmares are doors to our deepest fears, she said, sipping her tea. But they can also be opportunities to confront them. We remained silent for several moments, the kitchen clocks ticking, marking the seconds. Eleanor, I began hesitantly, what happened to your daughter? Her expression altered subtly. Why do you ask? You mentioned she doesn't live here anymore, but you never talk about her, and the photographs are all turned face down. Eleanor sighed, her fingers tracing the cup's rim. Clara chose a different path than I expected, she said finally. She married young to a man who reminded me too much of Richard. Your ex-husband? Yes. I tried to warn her, show her the signs I recognized so well, but she wouldn't listen. Thought I was just a bitter mother trying to sabotage her. I could hear the pain in her voice, old but still present. Don't you speak anymore? Rarely. He drove her away from me, as these men always do. She phones at Christmas, on my birthday, quick visits. Always with him present, controlling every word. I'm sorry, I murmured, imagining the pain of seeing her daughter repeat her own mistakes. So am I, she said with a sad smile. But I learned we can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Each person has their own time to awaken. If they awaken at all, I added. Yes, some cycles never break. She paused, her face assuming a more determined expression. That's why what you're doing is so important, Denise. Each broken cycle opens the way for others. Her words touched me deeply. I wasn't just fighting for myself, but for all the women trapped in similar situations, past, present, and future. Thank you, I said simply, knowing she'd understand the depth of gratitude I couldn't adequately express. Don't thank me yet, she replied. Your journey has only begun. In the days that followed, I continued reading Mary's journal. Her words, written almost a century ago, found echo in my own experience in a frightening way. The manner in which her husband isolated her from friends and family, how he diminished her opinions and feelings, how he convinced her she was incapable of surviving without him. But there was also something inspiring in her pages. Mary described small acts of rebellion, a book hidden under the mattress, a secret friendship with a neighbor, thoughts she kept protected in the sanctuary of her mind, where not even her husband could enter. In one particularly touching passage, she'd written, "Today, looking at myself in the mirror, I glimpsed for an instant the girl I once was, free, brave, full of dreams. She still lives in me, hidden under layers of fear and submission. Perhaps it's too late for me, but I pray my daughter and her daughter will find the freedom I never knew." I cried reading those lines, thinking about how her wish had partially come true in Eleanor. And perhaps, somehow, also in me, a stranger linked to her by an invisible chain of shared experiences. A week after my visit to Marcus's house, I received a formal envelope. Divorce papers, already filled out and signed by him. Along with them was a brief note. "Denise, you've won. I'll keep the flat and my personal accounts. You can have the main house and 30% of joint investments. I've signed the papers. Now sign yours and let's end this once and for all. Marcus." I showed the documents to Eleanor. "He's trying to settle this quickly before you discover more about his finances," she commented after hearing my description of the papers. "What should I do?" "Don't sign anything without speaking to your own solicitor," she advised. "He's probably hiding more than you imagine." I followed her advice and arranged a consultation with Dr. James Mitchell, a divorce specialist Eleanor knew. He confirmed what she suspected. Marcus's proposal was far below what I'd be entitled to in contested proceedings. "Considering our 30 years of marriage, he's counting on your ignorance and desire to avoid conflict," Dr. Mitchell explained. Typical in cases of controlling relationships, I decided not to accept Marcus's proposal and instructed the solicitor to prepare a fair counteroffer based on genuine equitable division of assets. Marcus's response wasn't long in coming. He called furious, shouting down the phone, "You really want to do this, Denise? Drag our name through the mud in a dirty process?" "I just want what's fair, Marcus," I replied calmly. "Half of what we built together." "Built together?" He snarled. "I built everything alone. You just stayed home living off me." "I worked alongside you for years at the beginning of the company," I reminded him. "And then you yourself insisted I leave my job. And all the domestic work, emotional support, social connections I maintained to benefit your career, that doesn't count." His momentary silence told me I'd touched a sensitive point. "You've changed," he said finally, his voice now low and dangerous. "You're not the Denise I knew anymore." "You're right," I agreed. "I'm not that person anymore, and I'm grateful for that every day." I hung up, realizing that for the first time, I'd ended a conversation with Marcus on my terms. When I told Eleanor, she smiled. "I knew you'd find your voice eventually," she said. "Now he'll try other tactics. Be prepared." She was right. In the following days, Marcus alternated between veiled threats and emotional pleas. He tried using mutual friends to convince me to be reasonable, even sent an enormous bouquet of flowers with a card asking forgiveness. "It's the classic cycle," Eleanor explained when I described his actions. "First anger, then manipulation, then empty promises. When none of that works, they return to anger, and the cycle begins again." One afternoon, while reading in the garden, Eleanor approached accompanied by a young woman. She appeared to be about 29, with large, frightened eyes and a demeanor that reminded me very much of someone I'd seen before. "Denise, this is Kiara," Eleanor introduced. "Kiara, this is Denise, whom I told you about." The woman greeted me shyly. There was something familiar about her that I couldn't pinpoint. "Kiara came to see me a few days ago," Eleanor explained. "She's going through a situation similar to yours." During tea, Kiara told her story, married for 5 years to a man who gradually isolated her from family, controlled her finances, and undermined her self-confidence through constant criticism and emotional manipulation. "I don't know what to do," she confessed, tears streaming down her face. "I'm afraid to leave and afraid to stay." I surprised myself by speaking with an authority I didn't know I possessed, sharing insights I'd gained in recent weeks. "Fear is normal," I told her. "It's part of the process, but the freedom that comes after is worth every moment of terror." Kiara looked at me with renewed hope. "How did you know you were ready?" she asked. "I didn't know," I replied honestly. "I just knew I couldn't continue as I was, and I was lucky to find Eleanor when I needed her most." Eleanor smiled, her sightless eyes fixed on a point beyond us. "It wasn't luck," she said. "It was destiny weaving its web." After Kiara left, Eleanor remained in the garden with me. "You handled that well," she commented. "Thank you." It was strange seeing myself in her, like looking into a mirror of the past. "That's precisely it," Eleanor agreed. "And perhaps that's the true purpose of all this. Not just your liberation, but the chance to help others liberate themselves too." That night I dreamed of a long, dark corridor dotted with mirrors. In each one I saw a different woman, some from the past like Mary, others from the present like Kiara, and some who seemed to belong to a future not yet written. All looked at me with the same eyes, my eyes, pleading for something I couldn't fully comprehend. I woke with a strange sense of purpose and connection, as if somehow my personal struggle was just one thread in a much larger tapestry.